What is owner financing? How does it work? We're going to talk about all that coming up next. Hey, what's going on, friends? Dylan Lanaka here with the Buy Big Island video blog, and this week we're going to talk about owner financing. And there's normally two ways that you can do it. One of them is an agreement of sale, which doesn't happen very often, hasn't happened really in decades. So we're not going to focus too much on that. The one that is commonly used and still happens very often is called a purchase money mortgage. And that's just a technical legal term for owner financing. And what essentially that is it is a addendum that you add to a purchase contract, which basically lays out the terms of an owner financed option on that property. So what that means is basically the owner is going to act as the bank and hold a mortgage on the property. The title and everything transfers to the buyer just like it normally would in a regular sale. Only the buyer and the seller would sign a document, a mortgage document that's recorded with the state of Hawaii and was recorded on the title that the seller holds a mortgage for X amount of dollars at the specified terms that you would input into that purchase money mortgage addendum. So that's going to say how long the mortgage is for, what the monthly payments are, what the late payment fees are. All of those specifics that you would normally have in a regular bank mortgage, you would have in that purchase money mortgage document. And that is what an attorney is going to use to draw up and have the buyer and the seller sign. So some situations that really have to be in place prior to owner financing being an option are important to consider. So the first one being the seller of the property has to own the property outright, right? They can't have a mortgage on the property and then mortgage it again through a seller financing type situation. At least almost all mortgages are not going to allow for that if you have some type of conventional financing. So that's the first thing is, as a seller, if you're going to offer seller finances as an option, then you're going to have to own the property outright. On the buyer's side, almost always a seller financed deal has to have a pretty considerable amount down. So if you have 10% or less down in terms of cash to make a down payment, a lot of times seller financing is not going to be an option because a seller is going to need a guarantee that the rest of that mortgage is going to be paid off. And the seller is also going to have to pay all of those closing costs, right? So the seller is going to pay the commissions like you normally would, any closing costs that need to be paid through title and escrow. And that's going to be a significant amount. So the seller is going to need to pay those fees off, and then they're going to need to have to walk away with some substantial amount of a down payment in order to guarantee that that buyer is going to end up fulfilling their side of the agreement and pay that mortgage off. Because if the buyer does not, the seller is going to have to go through a foreclosure proceeding to get the property back, and that can also cost time and money. And that is the risk of seller financing, is you do risk that. It doesn't happen very often, but it's definitely a risk when you do a seller financed transaction. So on the buyer's side, you probably are going to need 30 to 50 or more % down and expect to pay a higher interest rate than you would from a bank. So that's one of the things that's going to incentivize a seller to do this is, if the regular rates are 3 or 4%, you may be paying 5 or 6% on your seller financed mortgage as opposed to a bank financed mortgage. And you also need to expect on the buyer's side to have a shorter term. So a lot of times the way we'll structure it is we'll amortize the cost of the borrowed money over 30 years or 20 years. So your monthly cost will be low, but a lot of times that seller is only going to hold that mortgage for maybe 3, 4, or 5 years. Sometimes I've seen 10 years, but they're going to want a balloon payment, right? So you're going to have an exit strategy to pay the rest of your remaining mortgage balance off in a shorter period of time. Even though you're only paying as you would on a 30-year mortgage, you're probably going to have to pay it off in like 3 years or somewhere around there. So it's going to be a shorter time period. So situations where this makes sense. A lot of times, the vast majority of times when you see seller financing, it's on small pieces of vacant land where the cost isn't very high and where the buyer needs some time to purchase the property, get it under their name and title, and then go and build a house on it. And then once that's done, they can refinance the entire mortgage into a conventional mortgage and pay off the seller at that point. So that's commonly how seller financing is used, because it's hard to get a conventional loan for a $50,000 piece of land. So maybe they'll do $25,000 down, they'll finance for 2 or 3 years, they'll take a year, build their home, and then pay off that seller when they can refinance into a conventional mortgage when the home is built on the property. I've also seen it done on any type of other property, multi-million dollar properties where maybe you have a deal where somebody needs to liquidate some assets and they're going to do that in 6 months. So they ask the seller, can you hold a mortgage for 6 months? I'll give you $700,000 down, but you need a mortgage, $1 million of it, and we'll pay you off in 6 months once we liquidate some assets. There's lots of different types of situations in real estate. As in life, everything is negotiable. So you really want to take it on a case-by-case basis. Many sellers are not comfortable with it, so you're not going to see this on every single property, but in the right situation for a buyer and a seller, it's a very good option. And as a seller, if you're selling some type of vacant land or hard to sell property, it's definitely something that you may want to consider. But as always, speak to a real estate professional, maybe a real estate attorney if that makes you feel more comfortable, but explore your options. It's definitely a good option. In most cases, it works out positively for both parties, and you can get that property sold, and that person buying can purchase and build their dream house and then refinance into a conventional mortgage. So as always, if you have any questions, it's a quick summary of owner financing and the purchase money mortgage. It can get more complex like everything does, so always reach out if you have any questions, Dylan@BuyBigIsland.com, or you can shoot comments in the questions below. But thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next week. Aloha.